Hello, everybody. I'm going to kick off now. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our first Charity Digital webinar of 2021. It's great to be back after what was a restful Christmas for me, and I certainly hope all of you managed to have a really restful break as well. It's actually an exciting month for us as well, because this is the second anniversary of our webinar program overall. So we've done over 50 webinars now and had around 15,000 participants in those, which we're really excited about. We love doing these sessions and we love having all of you come along and join us. And I'm particularly excited about today's session as well, because we're joined by Zoe Amar, the chair of the Charity Digital Code, and she's going to be talking about how you can supercharge your digital in 2021. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Zoe. You might know her for her work on the code, but you might know her for many of her other charity activities. She obviously runs her own agency as well, and we're really lucky to have her as a trustee of the Charity Digital Trust as well. So that's really brilliant. So today's session, it's going to be a little bit different to our normal webinar. So if you've joined us before, you'll know that we do take questions at the end, but normally it's predominantly what I'll call broadcast mode. And we're going to look to make today a little bit more interactive. We always encourage you to chat with each other through the chat function, and we want more of that again today as well. But we're also going to have the opportunity for people to step up to the mic and share some of their thoughts, feelings, learnings, experiences as we go through. Zoe will talk you through that process. So that's really all I want to say by way of intro, because I really want to get us onto the main content, which I think is brilliant. And I'm delighted to welcome Zoe.
Thank you so much for that absolutely lovely introduction, Jonathan. Very nicely done, very well appreciated. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I don't know what it's like where you are, but if it's anything like where I am in Hertfordshire, it's this terribly grey, rather miserable day. And what we want to do in today's session is firstly to give you a bit of a chance to interact, to learn from each other, also to help hopefully get you thinking about some of the positive developments that I think everyone has made with digital over the last year, even if it feels like that progress has been really hard, even if it feels like there's some way to go. And obviously we'll see the results of that in the poll later on in this session. I think there is still stuff that we need to recognise and celebrate. So we'll be trying to spread a bit of positivity there as well. And most importantly, get some of you sharing the achievements that you've made, whether they're small, whether they're large. And then finally, to give you a bit of space in this session to reflect, to think about what you've achieved in digital over the last year so that you can plan for the future. So we've got a number of different exercises in this session to cover that. And so as you can see here, we'll be doing a bit of reviewing, but also really thinking about your users, so the people you support, your donors, your supporters, other stakeholders that you work with, how you can start to get under the skin of what they need. And then finally, to create a bit of a vision, that plan for the future. So those are the three key things that we will be covering today. Moving on. So just to briefly summarise about what the code is. So those of you who haven't come across the code, it's basically a free framework especially developed for charities to help you grow your digital skills in your organisation, to benchmark where you're at, and with the ultimate aim of helping you use digital to increase your impact and to be more sustainable and get everyone feeling really skilled up and confident. And whether you're a small charity or whether you're a larger charity, there are different versions of best practice in there for you, and obviously lots of different resources as well. And just to briefly mention before we talk about the poll results, there's also a checklist for trustees too. But I'll say a bit about that in a moment, because I imagine lots of you are burning to know the results of the poll. I feel like I'm announcing the Eurovision results or something. It's very, very exciting to do this. So this is really interesting. So we can see here that the majority of you, so just over half, fall into this category of you're not quite sure where you're going, you are making some progress, but there is still more that you need to do. So you've come to the right place today. That's exactly what we're going to be talking about. Really encouraging to see that there's just behind that, the 42%, there are those of you who are excited about building on the progress that you've made. So it'd be great to hear from you too as part of this session about what you're particularly excited and motivated about. And then of course there's always going to be a group where there'll be key issues, there are still things that you want to resolve. We are here for you as well today. We want to hear about the challenges you are facing, so that we can help resolve those. And if there's anything that's particularly sensitive or difficult, you'll see on the very final slide at the end of the session, I've put my email address as well. Don't be a stranger, ask for help if you have something really tricky that you're dealing with. Okay, so we talked about what the code is, we've shared with you poll results, so that's great to get a sense of where you're at. And just very briefly to say about this second link on this slide, if you're trying to get your leadership team to move forward with digital, if you're trying to support your board with how they understand digital and where you need support from them, perhaps you're making a case for investment to them, there is a special resource, again free, that we produced at the Code in partnership with trustees and leaders across the sector to help evaluate where you are in relation to things like remote working, fundraising, strategy, how you're looking after your people. It's got lots of key questions in there, so hopefully a good resource to help you evaluate where you are at, do a bit of benchmarking, whether you're at staff level or whether you're more senior. Great, lovely. Thank you so much. If we could look at the very first exercise. So I can see there's lots of people starting to talk to each other in the chat even before we started the session today, which is great. I would like to get to know all of you a bit better and to hear about what you've been doing with digital during the crisis. So whether you have made lots of progress or whether you're just taking some steps forward, I would like to hear about one digital activity that your charity has started during the crisis that you're proud of. It can be big, it can be small, but what I'd like you to do is take a moment. So if you could type that into the chat, but don't press return to post it until we say so. So I'll give you the signal to post it in, you know, a minute's time, and then it'll be really great to hear where you're at. So off you go. Okay, so do go ahead and post when you're ready. Oh, wow, lots here, guys. Thank you. Gosh, lots and lots to look at. So I'm just going to have a very, very quick look through and summarize some key themes. Oh, brilliant. So lots of very good stuff going on around service delivery, training, as we can see here. Some really interesting points about recruiting and also skilling up. Leslie, this is a great point here about using Zoom to boost morale, bring people together. Everyone is very rightly talking about well-being and mental health at the moment. It would be great to hear a bit more from you later if you're able to share your story about that. Sounds like a great thing to do. People talking about that shift to learning. So Vicky's mentioned that, some ways of innovating. I was seeing people here who are trying brilliant new things, which is also really, really good to know. People talking about increasing reach also, and different ways of sharing content as well. And I can see people have also shared some, you know, things they're worried about as well. So once we get onto the more interactive part of this webinar, you know, we'd love to hear from you too, perhaps particularly when we go through questions also. Great, thank you so much for that, everyone. Lots of change afoot in the sector, lots of progress made with digital. So let's dig into this a bit more as we move into the next exercise. So what I'm going to give you a moment today is to do something which is almost like a mini version of a digital exercise, which those of you who work in digital may have done on other occasions, which is called a retrospective. And really all that is, if you haven't done it before, not rocket science, it's just a really simple 3-step process to evaluate the progress you've made. Now, sometimes people will do this at the end of a project. Sometimes people will do this at the end of a product being launched, or either a kind of milestone phase in when you're developing something. But I think this can work really, really well in the context of thinking about the progress that your charity has made with digital during the pandemic, because we're talking about over 9 months now of a lot of activity, as we saw in the Icebreaker. So what I'd like you to do, and you can do this, however you'd like to, if you just want to write some notes down. But I think the thing to do is to take a few minutes. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do a bit of thinking. So these 3 key areas, what I'd like you to do. So what has gone well? Think about what you're particularly proud of, the achievements that you've made, the difference that you've made through digital. And then the second point about what could be improved, so the areas that you'd like to develop, and then thinking about it, what your next steps could be from there. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do that. So over to you. We'll speak to you in 3 minutes. Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Gosh, lots and lots of fantastic ideas coming through. I'll summarise them in a second before we bring someone on who's kindly offered to talk about their thoughts on these 3 points. But what I was reflecting on as I was reading those was, I bet none of us would have been able to do this stuff a year ago. So looking at the progress made, there's a real sense in a lot of them about this increased momentum for a lot of you, how things have become a lot tighter and more focused, more ambitious around where your model might actually end up. I think a few of you have talked about this blend of the face-to-face and the digital, and it's going to be really interesting to see how a lot of charities ultimately end up operating. And I think a couple of you mentioned increased collaboration as well internally, which is a really good thing to see. Someone also mentioned quite rightly, gosh, I'm just amazed we got through it. Good for you. I think if you're still standing, if you've managed to achieve anything at all over the last year, that in itself is brilliant and something to be celebrated. So lots of amazing progress here, guys. I think everyone who's managed to achieve anything over the last year deserves a massive pat on the back. Great. So plenty of fantastic things coming in there. I would like to invite Helen Bradley, who has very kindly put her hand up, who's offered to share some thoughts about where she's at with achievements and where she's going to go from here. So Helen, I would love to hear a bit more about your thoughts on these 3 points, if that's okay.
Hi, yes, I didn't realise I'd be the only one volunteering, so
thank you for being our first person to do that. Much appreciated.
You're welcome. Okay, I'll do my best. So basically, I work for an organisation called Keyring, which is a medium-sized organisation supporting members, as we call them, but are vulnerable adults with learning disabilities and other various support needs, to connect with their community, to develop and improve their lives, to achieve their potential, basically, and what they want to achieve. We already worked fairly remotely anyway. Most of our employees work out in the community. We provide digital equipment, if you like, laptops, etc. But so it worked quite well. But I think what this has really highlighted has been that we now are digital first. I don't know, our sector sort of has apologised in the past for having to use systems because we're all about people. And it was like, yes, well, we understand that, but can you just fill this in? Well, now it's actually, this is really important. Data is one of the most important things, keeping it safe, keeping good records, etc. That paperless approach, that agile on the move. So, we've kind of changed that mindset, and the lockdown has helped us to do that, if you like. So one of the big things is people embracing online platforms a lot more. So Zoom and Teams and, just understanding. I've run a whole management skills program via Zoom, which has gone down really well, which before probably wouldn't have been embraced as well. And people actually prefer it now because we're all over the country, so less travel. So it's been very good from that point of view. What it has highlighted, though, is that we need some new systems. The systems we've got aren't necessarily fit for purpose going forwards. And the other big area that's been highlighted is the digital inclusion agenda, and not just for us, but nationally. So there's a big thing in the news about some kids who don't have access to the internet or laptops, and they're being sent out. But it's equally as important for many adults who, for whatever reason, either don't have access to the internet, can't afford data, don't understand how to use it all. So we're taking a big part in, one, working in Keyring to implement that, but also the national agenda, because we think it's very important. And then just going forward, it's implementing all of those changes. So we've brought forward our digital roadmap. We're looking to increase investment, and also obviously the digital inclusion is a big part of our strategy going forwards.
That is brilliant, Helen. Well done. I mean, what an amazing transition to go from, as you said, working in an organisation that's quite paper-based to one that's now paperless and also digital first as well. I'd love to hear a bit more about the digital inclusion side of things, just briefly, if that's okay, because it's an issue that affects so many charities and the people that they support. Where would you recommend that people go to for help if they're worried that the people that they help can't get online, as you say, they might be experiencing data poverty, they can't get devices? Where do you go to get help with those issues?
You've put him on the step now, because it's actually my colleagues who are working a lot in that area, because I'm sort of the HR IT person. But we have connected into some national initiatives and have signed up to them. So I can obviously send the details of that through to you if you want to share that further. That's fine. It's really there is. It's like, like I say, it's come to the forefront with the lockdown, and it's gathering pace, shall we say? So there are some national initiatives going on, but the detail of it I can't share that right now because I don't know. Sorry.
That's okay, Helen. No, thank you very much for looking into that. I mean, just in case this is an issue which I imagine will affect other people on this call today, there's an initiative called Reboot, which is being run by Nominet, where they're essentially trying to get unused devices in the community, your old laptop, which you might not be using anymore, to charities and also schools and other organisations. So I'll see if I can pop the link in the chat to that later, because that's also a really good one to look at. And if anyone else knows about resources in the area that might help, please do pop them in the chat too. Helen, thank you so much. It's been lovely to have a bit of a guest starring appearance to hear about that and the progress you've made. So wonderful to thank you for sharing your story, and you've identified some really good, really clear next steps there. And if anyone wants to talk to Helen after, perhaps drop her a message in the chat. I'm sure there'll be lots of people who've been through some similar experiences or might want to pick your brain, if that's okay. Fantastic. Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much. And then very briefly, if it's okay, Paul, you've had your hand up. You've been very patient. Perhaps if we could just hear from you, Paul Hale, on these 3 points, it would be great if we're able to do that.
Thanks, Zoe. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Paul.
Hi. Sorry, I didn't realise you. Do you want to speak to more than one person? Because I don't. If you've got loads to get through, I can.
No. I mean, if you're able to briefly talk us through your ideas on these 3 points, that would be great.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Paul. I work for a young person's charity in Bristol. We provide housing and support to young people, and what went well, we mobilised our teams to enable them to work remotely in a week. I don't know how we did it in a week, but we managed to get equipment out to everybody's homes and set people up, which was great. And similarly to Helen, we worked on supporting our client group. So to do that, we set up some what we called COVID priority task groups. So one of them was to look at digital poverty and providing digital access to young people. One was to look at and this is the thing that both of these things continued. The second group was about maintaining relationships with support workers in the virtual world, and because face-to-face contact is very important for people. So we've maintained some of that, but a large part of it is virtual now, and ensuring that young people can stay safe when they're in the online world. We also applied for lots of small pots of COVID-specific funding, and we're quite successful in getting some of those to set up bursary pots for young people to access devices and data and things like that. We developed a digital strategy and a shared digital plan across the organisation, which is still in its formative stages. And to help with that, our next steps are going to be working with a digital expert partner company to do a review of our position now and where we're going to go in the future strategically, because clearly, like everyone else, this is going to continue into the long term, and we want to enable ourselves to have the right resources. And the last thing to say would be that one of the things that we did early on was identify that we might need some specialist expertise within the organisation to drive the digital strategy forward. So we created and recruited into a new role, a digital access coordinator, and which is my colleague Katie, who's also on this call. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Paul. Wow, lots of really good progress clearly has been made there, and you've just articulated that transition from lots of activity to strategy really well, and I think that's exactly where many of us need to be going at the moment, really drawing on these lessons learned and then thinking about what that means for where we need to go to after the crisis and how we're going to get there. And we're going to do an exercise towards the end of this session to get everyone thinking about that. I also loved your emphasis on who's actually going to own this strategy in the long term, because I think that is a bit of a risk that I see in some organisations, that a strategy gets written and then the person who owns it leaves, or people aren't quite sure where it sits. And actually that's something we specifically built into the code, actually, where we've recommended, look, someone's got to be monitoring this thing and really owning it and accountable for it. So brilliant to hear that. Fantastic. Right, so 2 excellent stories to kick us off with there. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Paul. If we could move on to the next exercise now, if that's okay. So before I set that up, if there's one thing I would love everyone to really focus on as we move into planning further for where we go from digital during the pandemic through to the end of 2021, it's all about how can we put our users at the heart of what we do. And that is a principle which lots of you will be really, really familiar with and doing really well already. And I can see some of that coming through brilliantly in the responses that you've shared in the chat. Sometimes it's really helpful to take a step back though, and to think about how we're doing that, how we might compare to other organisations, what we're not doing to close any gaps that you have, particularly because the way in which your supporters and the people who you help using digital is likely to be evolving really rapidly and will continue to do so. So in the code, there's a specific principle about this, about being truly user-led. I can see here that Jonathan says they've done a webinar specifically about it, which is great. So it'd be great to dig into that for a bit of further information. And do take a look at this particular area in the code too, because it's got quite a lot of advice for small as well as large charities. Okay, so if we move on to how we will think about this a bit further. So what you will have been gathering over the last year or so with this huge amount of activity we've seen during the pandemic is really seeing how digital is beginning to change the behaviour of the people that you support. And within that, I would also very much include the people who aren't able to get online, who are very sadly in many cases being left behind because they don't have access to digital. So I think it's really important to think about both of those groups. So this exercise, very similar to before, I'm going to give you some time to think, then we're going to hear from some people as well. But what I'd like you specifically to do, to think about one beneficiary, one donor, or some other kind of key stakeholder or supporter who's particularly key to your charity's future. So example, a charity that we were working with recently, they were particularly keen to acquire new younger donors. So if they were in the room here, then that's the thing we'd be looking at. We'll just pick one user who's particularly important to you. Now imagine them in this world which is going to arrive at some time post-vaccine, 2022. Think about what things are going to be like for them then. What's happened to their income? What's happened to their living situation? What challenges have they faced? What trends are happening? What changes might they have been through? And obviously, if you can make sure as much of that is based on data, so insights that you've actually observed about these changes, that would be really good. Don't worry about them being perfect. And if you'd like to share your thoughts, it'd be really great to hear from you again. Pop your hand up and we'll hear from one or two of you about your thinking on where the people you support could be in 2022. So off you go. Fantastic. Right. So Pete, hello, you've put your hand up. It'll be great to hear from you, if that's okay. Someone from the Charity Digital team will unmute you. Oh, Pete, hello.
Hi, can you hear me now, Zoe? Yeah?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant.
We can. Great. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Go on.
Okay, very briefly, I'm CEO of the Fragile Society. It's an organisation that looks after people with learning difficulties, adults and their carers. We have found, to answer your questions directly, in the first instance, the income of our donors and our supporters and members has definitely reduced. And we've lost about £16,000 by not being able to have mass participation events, swims, runs, coffee mornings. That said, bizarrely enough, we've been able to pick up significantly more grants and have actually ended up this year in a much better and stronger financial position than last year. The challenge for us is many of those were COVID specific grants, which won't be coming through this year. So they've given us a temporary boost. So we're doing okay at the moment. In terms of the living situation, a lot of our members have high levels of anxiety, and we have a real problem with engaging them. And that's one of the things I'd like other people to share today, is how you engage with a membership. We have a membership of about 2,500. We put on good online events, but people are reluctant to come and join, partly because of their own anxiety, partly I think because of Zoom fatigue, a reluctance to sort of take part, but also just because people now have kids at home instead of at school. They are full-time carers, and just literally the time commitment to take part in online events just has diminished. So the big question I'm trying to answer today is how we can keep up our engagement online with our people given the circumstances that they face. Okay.
Thank you, Pete. That's really, really interesting to hear that. And you're right. I do think digital fatigue is a big issue at the moment. So thank you again to everyone who's made the time to come today, especially because of that. I mean, what I would be inclined to do if it was me, is to think about all those different touch points that you've got with members, which may also be through other people. So it reminds me a little bit of a situation we had with a youth charity we were doing work with a few years ago. We're actually trying to persuade them to engage with the services was partly about getting their peers to talk to people in their network rather than necessarily, kind of like broadcasting it on social media. So I think that there might be some stuff that you could look into there around all the different ways you currently interact with people and where their peers may interact with the people that you need to get to. Because perhaps at the moment, as you say, if people are feeling a bit fatigued about engaging digitally, there might be other ways to keep those people warm through the networks that you have and the people who are influential in your networks as well. So that's where I'd start, I think, really mapping out all those different interactions and where others can help you broker and strengthen those relationships as well.
Brilliant. I think that's really useful because we have a model at the moment that's very centralized where we advertise through newsletters and send emails out. But I think you're right. If we can use the trustees and our supporters to cascade down to their colleagues, that bit builds up a sort of pyramid. So yeah, I welcome that. It's a really good idea. Thanks, Zoe. Good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Pete. And just on that note, in case it's useful for anyone else, one exercise we did on a board that I used to sit on of another charity was to map out all the stakeholders who people in the organisation knew. And actually there was a huge amount with collectively who the board knew, and indeed at staff level. And I think that sometimes gets a bit overlooked, the people who are in the networks of staff and also volunteers and the board. So that sounds like a great thing to do, as well as mapping out the journey from the point of view of the members. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Pete, for that guest cameo appearance there. I'm going to move us on now, if that is okay, to the final exercise that we have. I just want to give us a little bit more time for it because there's a bit of thinking to do. So today we've done a bit of a whistle stop tour of thinking about all the amazing progress that you have made with digital during this time. We've also got you thinking about where your users will be in this elusive world that will arrive sometime post-pandemic. What I'd like us to do now is to pull some of that together, thinking about where you will be with digital by 2022. So there may be 3 key things or even more that you're focusing on so that you can achieve whatever you're trying to do. So for example, some of you have already talked about fundraising, you've talked about service delivery, so it might be that you're focusing on certain things so that you can be more sustainable or reach more people or increase the confidence of staff. You will know best what your goals are, but a couple of things to factor in there. Thinking about how the people you support and other stakeholders, how their use of digital might have changed by that time, by 2022, and what specifically you need to focus on to get there. So there's quite a few things to think about there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Again, don't worry about it being perfect. So pop your ideas down and then I will just do a bit of summarising and then we'll have some time for Q&A as well afterwards. Great, thank you so much, everyone. Lots of fantastic ideas coming in there, featuring how you want to improve things in terms of digital fundraising, also service delivery. I can see lots here about, someone's put a great comment about using data much more to inform their marketing and fundraising so you can make really data-driven decisions. That's great. That's music to my ears. That's wonderful. Lots of people talking about using digital comms more. I think you've all done lots of thinking about this stuff even before this session today. It's brilliant because I can really see that here. Someone's talking about, Mary's talking about having an agile, this is exciting, an agile workforce able to deliver a hybrid model of digital and face-to-face services from any location. This is brilliant. This is about what the future of the sector could look like. It's going to be different for everyone. There is no magic bullet on the perfect blend of face-to-face and digital, but it's really interesting to hear about how some of you, how your model's going to possibly look really quite different a few years down the line, which is fascinating. Someone put a really good comment here just on that point about, I think it's from Catherine, by 2022 we will be able to offer a fully blended services where our young people and families can switch between online and in-person support, and this is about those choices, whether they go down either of those routes is very much dependent on that person's needs. That is really interesting. I think that is such a good idea. It's really fine-tuning what you do, how you deliver your services based on what people truly want, what is best, and that feels very inclusive as well, which is great. But also making sure that you take stock, as Catherine's put here, we need to learn from the work that's happened over the last year, taking the best of their digital advances, integrating the future of your delivery. So that feels like it's an entire charity which is based around this model of test, learn and improve, and putting user needs at the heart of what you do. Catherine, this is super exciting. Great. So lots of very, very exciting plans for the future there, and change is coming. There's going to be even more, isn't there? This is all about the start of a wave of disruption we're going to see. So thank you so much for sharing those. A lot of very, very exciting things coming in there. Doubtless there'll be some questions about challenges as well, so we're really looking forward to talking through those. So I think now is the point when Jonathan and I open up the floor to you all. We have had I think a question or two coming in, but if you've got any other questions for us, please do pop them in the chat. We will take those. Jonathan, do you want me to kick off with these questions, or do you want to?
Yes, I'll curate them for you, so you don't need to worry about what's in there. I will just throw the questions at you, because sometimes and do post them up, everybody. Sometimes we have lots there, so we need to kind of tackle them in a certain priority order, and you can upvote them for everybody out there if there's ones you particularly like the look of and that you want us to focus on answering. But there's not too many at the moment, so I'll just start at the top. So the first one is the charity digital code available for KICs that are focused on community and charity. So I think that's a really good and pertinent question.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, absolutely. If you're a KIC or any other kind of non-profit, absolutely, you can use it. I mean, that was very much something everyone had in mind when we were drafting the code, and we do hear that it's used from other community groups and social enterprises, and I'm sure there must be some KICs somewhere who are using it as well. If you've got any questions, anonymous attendee, about how to apply it to a KIC, please feel free to drop me a line. I'd be happy to help. But I think the framework will be useful for you in your legal form.
Good, thanks for that. And next question from Rian. This is a really important question. And I know it's one that's be very close to your heart, because you're obviously working with us within Charity Digital on our equality, diversity and inclusion policy as well. So the question is, are you aware of any ways to embed anti-racism within digital strategy or communications? Rian says, my organisation does not have a focus on race or equality in itself, but anti-racism work is important everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent question. Yeah, I've got some thoughts on that, and I can also reference how we started to tackle this in our own organisation, I guess, as well as Charity Digital. I mean, one thing that we found really helpful is to think about all those different interactions that we have with the people that we help, whether that's online, but also to think about where you're interacting with them perhaps offline as well. Because I think in an ideal world, speaking as a BAME woman, what I'd love to see is that we have this truly inclusive approach, not only throughout all of our digital activities, but also our offline activities as well. So kind of calling back a bit to what I was saying to Pete earlier in the exercise, if you can map out all the different ways in which you are interacting, communicating, providing services for people, and then what we did was to really establish, well, what might being racist or microaggressions look like in those situations, and then to think about how to counteract those. So I think that can be a good way to do that. Other ideas that occur to me off the top of my head, with user testing, for example, make sure that you are involving a really diverse range of users from lots of different backgrounds, so you're not just developing products and services for one particular group. And yeah, absolutely make sure that you're also running interviews as well on top of that regularly, to get those in-depth insights from people from different backgrounds who've got different perspectives. So that's definitely, I think, a key thing to look at, as well as perhaps some of your internal processes about how you run digital day to day, and making sure that you've got a staff team who again represent that range of different backgrounds. So I think you've got to look at it internally and externally and think about all the the different processes and ways you work, and also what success could look like there as well.
Yes, and I can add a little bit onto that actually, because as a charity ourselves, we wanted to make sure that we were kind of walking the talk on this. And so we started off by getting the National Centre for Diversity to come in and do an evaluation survey, and that looks both to your internal stakeholders like your staff and your trustees and external people. And the findings for that were really kind of really insightful for us to then work out our plans for what we were going to do to improve our diversity, equality and inclusion overall. So you do have to pay a little bit of money for that, but they do offer charity rates, and it was well worth it in my opinion. But we better move along. Next question is from Alex Tate. Alex says, we want to plan our first ever online fundraising campaign. What is a good starting point? Any guidance you would recommend?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you would do is, before you even go out there with a fundraising ask, and I know I sound like an absolute broken record, but is to go and talk to your donors and other supporters. I completely appreciate you haven't run a digital fundraising campaign before, but that's why it's particularly important to get those insights. So to start with the people who are supporting what you do, who are giving to you in some ways, and ask them how they are using digital, you know, where they found some of the what they like about it, which channels they're using, how they're using it, what kind of content engages them. I'd also ask them what other content they've seen from charities that might have motivated them to give, or that they found particularly engaging. And then I would use those insights as a way to start to build a picture of how your donors are using digital. I would also, alongside that qualitative data, look at the quantitative data. So look at the analytics from your website, from your social media, from your email newsletters, just to see how people are engaging with your content, what's working for them, what's not working for them. And then it's about testing. Definitely test ideas, test campaigns before you go out there with the big online fundraising campaign. So it might be that after that user exercise that I mentioned, doing those interviews and looking at the data as well, that you start by just testing a email newsletter fundraising campaign on just 100 people and see how that goes down, and then learn from that, and then look at what you can scale. So I'd start small and then look to scale based on what you've learned from that.
Good, thank you, Zoe. Just so people know, there've been a few questions about the chat. Obviously there's been loads of really great content in the chat, and what we'll do is we will take a copy of that and make that available along with the recording of this webinar and the slides, and those will all go online within the next week, so people can come back in and look at all of that information and consume it in a bit more detail, because there was some really deep and helpful information there, which I'm sure people want to look at more. But let's go to the next question, which comes from Rob Thompson. Rob is saying, how can we set up a digital 250th anniversary in 2021 with a series of events? We're starting now from basically nothing.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. Also, I think someone else has asked a question about anniversaries, or Judith Austin. So thank you. So I guess I can kind of deal with both of those at the same time. I think the number one thing I would say about any anniversary campaign, particularly in the context of COVID, is that it's really important to look forward. I sometimes see anniversary campaigns that are a bit kind of nostalgic, and whilst I think you can use them as a way to reference your track record and to thank people in particular, perhaps donors who supported you for a long time, I think now really focusing on the future and why people need to keep supporting you is really important. It's all about helping people look forwards rather than back. So actually, again, I'm really conscious I'm probably giving the same advice again, but I would talk to some of those long-standing supporters. You know, how did they first come to connect with your charity? What are the things they particularly like that they found useful? Because I think you could build a campaign around that. It's that content which particularly resonates with people. and think about how you can target more of those kinds of supporters. So perhaps there are some, you know, some people that you have been in your community previously who've supported you, who you've kind of lost a bit of connection with. And if you can really get to the bottom of, well, why did people engage with us in the first place? Perhaps that's a way in which you can kind of reawaken those relationships. So I think starting with what is that proposition is really, really key, and then find out what people would want from that. You know, do they want to do something that's a bit more social? Is it more about a kind of conferencey type element? It's all got to be built around their needs and their reasons for supporting you. That's where I'd start.
Good, thanks, Zoe. We've still got loads of questions here, so we're going to keep moving through. I'm really delighted to see such a diversity as well. And the next one from Robin is about social media. So how do you see the social media landscape? Will existing channels still dominate, or will new platforms like TikTok, Signal, MeWe take over?
Yeah, so this is obviously a very pertinent issue. So thank you for asking, particularly in a week where Trump has been banned from Twitter. My gut feel at this stage is that the big players like Twitter, like Facebook, like Instagram will remain. Yes, there will still be kind of challenger brands as well. So I think TikTok has kind of proved itself that I think it's going to be around for a while, but I think the landscape will look different a year or two down the line because of regulation. I think the regulation of tech companies is inevitable now. It's coming. Some of them have kind of backed themselves into a corner. So whilst I think a lot of the big players will look the same, the way in which they operate, the way in which the fact that they'll be regulated will mean that those platforms actually will probably be nicer places to be. And maybe it will even go back to people having more balanced conversations on there eventually, once we know what this regulation looks like. But that's something that I think will happen post-COVID, post-vaccine, but it's coming.
Good. Now we're just about up to the hour, but I know Zoe said that she can run a little bit past the hour, so I'm going to keep moving through. I'm not sure that we'll have time to do all of the questions, so we will continue to focus on those that are being upvoted as well. The next question, again, really pertinent because I think we've all suffered from this at some stage. This is from Robin Lane. What approaches have been used to combat Zoom and webinar fatigue?
Oh, very good. And the irony of asking that on a website. I love that. Well, I was talking to a digital CEO, a charity CEO yesterday, who was saying the best thing that they had done over the last few months was to use the off button. And certainly since coming back to it after Christmas, I'm trying to be a lot more rigorous with boundaries. So I was doing a lot of late nights. I'm trying to make sure I log off a bit earlier. So I think setting yourself some boundaries, and also with your team encouraging them to set boundaries as well. One thing I'm doing as well, which I found quite helpful, is to almost have office hours for Zoom calls. So previously I might say, yeah, I'm free Tuesday 9 to 5 for the Zoom call, and now instead I might say, well, I'm free between 2 and 4 to do calls, but the rest of the time I've blocked those slots out in my diary to write a report or write a digital skills survey for a client, you know, the stuff where I just really need to get my head down. So I think there's something there about boundaries, how you manage your time, how you help your team manage their time as well. And also, you know, speaking of mental health, making sure you make some time for you, positive reason to get away from your computer. So I've become a running fanatic during lockdown. Find something that gets you away from your screen.
Yeah, I'd build on that as well and kind of say things like, even if it's just 5-minute breaks, so try and, rather than having everything going straight one webinar or straight one Zoom call into another, even if it's just a 5-minute break. So at like 12:55 there's a break and the next one starts at 1. That 5 minutes to get away, stretch your legs, whatever, just off the screen, just makes a massive difference. Let's keep moving. Sorry, go on, Zoe.
Sorry, just brief. I was going to say one tip on that is if you use Google Calendar, which we do, and I don't know whether this functionality is built into if you use the Microsoft products, but there's a setting there called speedy meetings. So a 60-minute meeting automatically gets set as 50 minutes, 30 minutes as 25 minutes, and so forth. And then what I do is during the 5 minutes, if I haven't yet been out that day, I will, walk around the block and listen to some music, and that's really helped me.
Yeah, exactly. So next question's from Terence. Terence is saying, how can we improve user engagement online? We've tried with polls, surveys, webinars, and many other things, but only have limited engagement. Is this potentially due to people being unsure, and therefore we need to give them more time with continued engagement? Or are there other means to achieve better engagement online?
Oh, this is such an interesting question. I wonder whether the answer is about the content rather than the means, because you can give people as many polls as you like, but if the content, the questions don't resonate with people, then they're not going to engage. So I feel like there's some testing to be done there. Even if you just talk to 5 people about some of that content that you've been trying recently, and ask them what they think of it. Maybe ask them what other organizations they engage with. I think outside the charity sector too, what sites or apps they found particularly sticky and they return to, and they talk to people about. Again, it's going to come back to something like really relevant content that really resonates with them, lots of good storytelling. So I think find 5 people, talk to them, but don't be discouraged, don't give up. People do want to interact online. I think there's just something there to unlock about the best content, the best way to do it.
Good. Now there's a question which will be relevant to a lot of the smaller organizations joining us today from Georgina. And she's saying, what is your best advice for a charity that is tiny and has a very small team? What's the most important digital focus?
Thank you. And hello, Georgina. If it's the same Georgina I'm thinking of, I think we were talking about this on LinkedIn yesterday, and this is an excellent question for smaller organisations. I think the first place to start is the same as it would be with a large organisation, actually, and it's about data. So again, I would go back to, even if you've got very little budget, very little time, the stuff that you can see for free. So how are people using our website, how they interacting us with on social media, email newsletters, all those kinds of things. I've assumed that you've got some kind of digital presence, and just see what you can learn from that. And again, if you've got time to talk to a really small group of people about what other charities that they interact with digitally, then that would be really interesting. But I think just start with the data, look at what you can learn from that, and I think there'll then be some questions that come out from that, which you could then talk to your supporters about. So you might have an assumption about, oh, well, people are spending 5 minutes on our homepage because they find it really useful. Well, that's a really interesting assumption to talk to people about. Maybe they're spending 5 minutes on your homepage because they don't know what to do. They can't find where they should go from there. So data first, talk to some people, and I think that will start to reveal some next steps on how you can use digital.
Thanks, Zoe. Moving now to Mark Freeman, who has a question on how do we make a truly hybrid service? This could be for events, training and support from our position, but could be about delivering other services.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is the $64,000 question, particularly because we don't yet quite know what the future will look like. I would be inclined to plan for this for a number of different scenarios, because we don't yet know what this is going to. I'm particularly thinking of the thing that Chris Whitty said, I think it was last week, where he was saying there could still potentially be some restrictions next winter. Now, I'd hope that whatever restrictions there will be won't be on the scale that we're seeing now, with schools closed, offices completely shut. But I think that I would be looking maybe at one scenario where not everything go back to where it is before, but we are all allowed to meet face to face, albeit with perhaps wearing some masks, or something that's a bit more of a mix. But again, the place to start would be talking to your supporters and service users, and finding out where they would want things to continue face to face and where they would want things to be delivered online. So again, I think it's your learnings there about what has worked and what hasn't worked during this time. So I was with a group of small charities yesterday where some of them were saying actually it's because we've been able to use Zoom a lot more for meetings, that saved us so much time and money. But there are these groups of vulnerable people that we support where we have to do this hand holding face to face once we are allowed to do that. So it's going to be a balance, but I would design it along basis of different ways in which social distancing may or may not be there in 6 to 9 months' time.
Yeah, it's such a relevant question, that one, isn't it? It will emerge, and I think, as with all things digital, we need to kind of experiment and learn from those experiences as we move out of pandemic in the future. Let's keep moving along. Carey wants to apply for some funding to look at digital strategy and wants to have a consultant, so to engage a consultant to help make that application. Do you have any tips or things they should look for or be aware of when they're looking for someone to do this?
Yeah, so firstly, I think find someone who's a good fit for you, Carey, and also someone who really listens to you as well, who really is willing to take the time rather than just talk at you about how great they are, to really understand your situation. So actually a really good indicator of that, I think, will be the kind of quality of questions, the amount of questions they ask as part of the process of you going out there and talking to people. I think that a good consultant won't expect to have some beautifully written out brief. They actually might not need a brief at all. They'll just want you to share some initial ideas on where you're at and then be able to tease out what you might need. So I wouldn't worry too much about, I know people often get quite anxious in the situation about, oh gosh, I need to have this beautiful brief. I don't think you do. And actually, I think it's a sign of a good consultant if they're willing to just have a bit of an open conversation about where you're at, because they should be able to ask the right questions to work out what you want to prioritize there. So fit, not worrying about having a brief. What else? I think I know it sounds very obvious, but maybe having a very clear idea from them about what's happening and when. I mean, we've been into charities where afterwards people have said, oh, I wasn't quite sure what they were going to deliver, or I wasn't quite sure how to hold them accountable for this. And really, I think when they put together that proposal for you, it's almost got to be a bit like a governing document. So anyone can look at it as you get into the project or at points where you get stuck, so that you're really clear on, right, this was happening and when, these are the things that we're aiming for, this is what the outcomes of the project are going to look like. So ask loads of questions about that and make sure you get that nailed down. It should be incumbent on the consultant to do that, but challenge on that if you feel like you're not getting that before you sign anything.
Yes. I think another thing with consultants always is to recognize you're still going to have to sink significant time into this yourself to actually give the consultant all the knowledge they need to shape a decent application. So from my perspective, I would say try and learn as much as you can about that application process, so that if you want to apply for anything in the future, you're not dependent on consultants and you actually know enough to do it yourself. But if you haven't done it before, it does make a lot of sense to get the help to do that. Let's move along. Vicky's interested in the impact the pandemic's had on staffing, IT, and of digital development within charities. So have people found that projects and investment have been reduced or postponed? What's your perspective on that, Zoe?
Oh, now this is an interesting one, because I'm hearing different perspectives on this right across the board, and I guess it's going to depend on your organizational priorities and what you have in the way of investment. Yeah, I mean, there are some things that have been put on pause, but also there still seem to be a lot of projects happening as well. I mean, to be honest, I think the answer to this often, it'll come down to money. It's also going to come down to your leadership as well. I've been very impressed by how some charity boards are, that we finally get why this is really important, and we're willing to prioritise funds towards this. So it's a bit of an open answer. Sorry, Vicky. It's very much going to depend on your budget, and also where your leadership, your strategy going in the future. But certainly, I think there's a lot of activity in digital at the moment from my perspective.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. As you say, kind of a bit of a polarization. So some things have accelerated, and other maybe less urgent stuff's probably been pushed more onto the back burner. That's what I've seen from the charities we've talked to. Are you okay to run on a bit more, Zoe, to see if we can nail the last few questions?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps if we could take a couple more, if that's okay. It's just because I've got a 2:30.
Yeah,
so,
sure. Yeah. Okay, so there are two more that came in before 2 o'clock, so I'll take those in that order. Rebecca is saying that they've got a handful of staff based far away from the office, but that seems to be increasing now, and they're actually now recruiting staff who are not limited by location. And she wants to know if others have found that too, and whether this kind of concept of maybe remote and office-based teams may be a permanent fixture beyond the pandemic.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's the question which I think a lot of us will be considering at the moment. If I take that final part of your question first, yes, absolutely. I think in the same way that our many charity service delivery model will be a bit of a blend of the face-to-face and the digital post-vaccine, I think exactly the same for our staff teams as well. And there was a really good podcast I was actually listening to this morning. Some of you might have come across Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, which I'm a bit obsessed with, and it's hosted by Bruce Daisley, who used to be at Twitter, speaking of social media, for the question earlier. And it was all about, well, what does the workplace of the future look like? And he was very much saying that the likelihood is that people are only going to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. People obviously need smaller office spaces because of that, and organisations are going to put a lot more emphasis on what he called remote equity. So I'm sure we've all been in situations where if you dialed in for a meeting before the pandemic, you felt like a bit of an afterthought. But actually, organisations are going to think a lot more about how can we make sure that people who are dialing in have kind of equal status. And it might even be, if you're the only person in the office and you're the one who's dialing in from there, then you might feel like the person who's not quite equal. So I think there's something about how can we make the employee experience feel, everyone's included and involved. And I think that's going to be really important if everyone's going to continue to work in different places and locations as they will be. I think this is an opportunity to redefine the culture that your charity has as well. And to think about how you can bring people together when they're not necessarily having that shared experience of all being in the office kitchen every day. So Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, definitely worth listening to about the future of the office.
Good, thank you. And now for the final question then from Donna. He's saying it's been really interesting to hear about using digital for external comms. Her focus is on internal comms. So she works for a global organization focusing on primate conservation and their habitats. And her question is, has anyone else launched a global intranet, and how have other charities launched this?
Well, I'm sure they have, and it's not something I have experience of specifically, but it'd be really interesting to hear from other charities who have done that during this summer. I'm quite impressed that you've made it through 9 months of the pandemic without having an intranet, and I wonder there, Donna, do you have some other way of staff communicating with each other? I imagine you have something like Slack or Teams, so people can do the work collaboration and water cooler stuff alongside email. Oh, you don't currently, Donna? Amazing. Gosh, I'm very I don't know how you've done it. That's amazing. It's almost like a case study in itself. So I think here, if you're going to launch any new internal tool, again, it's going to come back to involving your staff. So I remember charity that I used to work at for 5 years, a long time ago, they brought in a really great intranet, but not many people used it. And I think if I could go back in time, one thing I would have loved to have seen there is for staff to be involved in testing it, in talking about what they wanted from it, what would motivate them to use it, where they might have used intranets successfully a lot in other organisations before. I think what you want to do, rather than it being seen as a transactional tool, is making sure it's a space which staff feel really emotionally invested in. So definitely starting with talking to people, perhaps doing some interviews, finding out what people want from it before you go anywhere near the procurement, and doing an extensive process of testing internally. That feels like a good way to make sure that you are making the right investment.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Zoe. So that's going to be all we've got time for in terms of the Q&A. Really want to start off by thanking Zoe very much for giving up her time. Thought that's been a fascinating session, lots of interactivity, which was the aim. And in actual fact, if you enjoyed that and you would have liked more time for interaction, I need to make you aware that we've got our conference coming up from the 2nd to the 4th of March, and Zoe's going to be coming back to that. On day 2 of the conference, we're going to be running a number of interactive workshops, and Zoe will be leading one of those. So you're welcome to apply for those workshops, but do please join us for the rest of that event as well. Looking at the other things that are coming up, obviously Brexit has happened. We have left the single market and the customs union, and those have been real implications of that. So we've got a podcast which we're releasing next Tuesday, which is all about Brexit and the charity sector. If you're not moving goods around, you might not be affected by that, but you might have data which is stored outside the UK. So you need to understand the data implications of Brexit. So those will be covered, amongst other things. So do please join us for that. It's not live as such, so you can download that anytime after next Tuesday. And then on Thursday, 28th of January, we have how 2021 may be one of the most digital fundraising years ever. Always a very popular topic with our audiences, digital fundraising, and I think ever important in this time where we still can't have physical events. So do please join us for that. So that's really all I want to do. I want to thank Zoe very much for joining us today and giving up her time. And I want to thank all of you who've actually stuck with us right to the end of this. We have overrun a little bit, but we always like to give some extra time if we can, to try and dig in and answer as many of your questions as possible. But thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.